So the instance is up and running here. So if you see the status is active, the engine is MySQL, and you can get some other information also, like what is the CPU activity, what is the current connection, and the database instance class, where the instance has been launched, whether it is multi-AZ or not. We have launched a multi-AZ instance. If you click on this, it'll take you to the overview page, or the instance overview page, wherein you can get much more information that from the previous page. So RDS gives you the monitoring. You'll see CloudWatch monitoring metrics also, like CPU utilization, database connections, freeable memory, read and write IOPS, etc. Now, one of the most important things is this endpoint. So this is the endpoint which is given to us, and we can use this endpoint to connect to the MySQL database instance. Now, if you remember, we cannot log in, we cannot SSH into the EC2 instance on which this MySQL database engine has been installed. So there's no way we can log into the operating system or the database server by itself. The only way to use this RDS is to use this endpoint. That's why it is managed service, because why would you want to log in if you can't manage, if you can't administer? Because everything will be taken care of by AWS. So AWS RDS does not give you SSH access to the underlying operating system, and we can only use or only connect to the database using the endpoint. This is the endpoint. This is the DNS name of the endpoint, and this is the port which we had chosen, and it is publicly accessible. So there are other information also. If you see the security groups, then other details like what is the ARN of this database instance, the engine type, the licensing model, database name. Now this is the database name which was created when this instance was launched. If you add or if you create additional databases after logging into the MySQL, after connecting to the database using MySQL client, those database names will not come in the console. You cannot see those database names anywhere in the console. So it will just tell you which database was created during the creation of this instance. This is the master username. Will be using this username to connect to this database engine using MySQL client, and rest of the things like on which AZ it was launched, what is the VPC, what is the subnet group, which subnets are part of the subnet group, security group, and the endpoint, and the other things like instance class, storage type, multi-AZ deployment is enabled or not, what is the secondary zone of the multi-AZ. The primary zone is US East 1D, and the secondary zone is US East 1C. So the standby instance or the standby database MySQL database instance would be in US East 1Z AZ, US East 1C AZ, and the primary would be in US East 1D AZ. We disabled automatic backup. We don't want to show that, and whatever was done during the launch of the database instance, all information you can get from here. A few other information like whether replication is enabled or not. Yes, we have enabled replication. We have enabled synchronous replication using multi-AZ, and we have not created any CloudWatch alarms. There's no snapshot yet. We have not tagged the database instance, and these are the logs which are being stored in CloudWatch logs. All right, so the instance has been launched, and let us go ahead and connect to this database engine. I have launched an EC2 instance. This is the IP address of the EC2 instance. I'll connect to it. Now currently this EC2 instance does not have any MySQL client installed. So you can see that it says bash MySQL command not found. We'll install MySQL client, and then we'll connect to the database engine using this client. We'll use this client to connect to the database engine or database instance which was launched. Now if you type the command again, MySQL -- version, it will tell you okay, the MySQL client has been installed. Let us try to go ahead and connect to the database. So how do? You use MySQL command line. So MySQL-h is the host name. The host name would be this endpoint, this DNS endpoint. We already know the port name, which is 3303. So this is the host name, and then port would be 3306. User is root, and -p, you have to provide the password. All right, so the command to connect to that database instance is this one, mysql dash dash host, and we'll have to give the host name or the endpoint which you have seen in the console. So that is the host name, and port you already know, which is 3306. User is actually the administrative user which you have created, that was root, and password was abcd1234. Now I have connected to that particular database engine. Now if you type this command show databases, you should be able to see the tetranoodle database. So this is the database. Let us go ahead and create one more database. Let us go ahead and create one more database. The command would be create database astronaut db. So this is the database which you want to create, and if I type show databases, we should be able to see astronaut db being created. Now I'll connect to this database, and now I'll create a table in this database. This is the command to create the table. So we are creating a table named astronaut underscore table, and these are the columns: astronaut ID, first name, last name, primary interest, location, and astronaut ID would be the primary key. This is a very simple table. There's no complications here because we don't want to complicate at least the database portion. And the table has been created. Now if you type show tables, it will show you astronaut underscore table, which has been just created. Let me go ahead and insert at least 2 rows in this table. This is the first row which is being inserted. Now I'll insert one more row. So this row contains astronaut ID is 100, then the first name is tetranoodle, last name is training, primary interest is AWS, and location is USA. Let me go ahead and insert one more row. And this is the second row with astronaut ID 200, first name tetra, last name training, the primary skill is AWS serverless, and location is global. So these are the 2 rows which has been inserted. Let us go ahead and try to find these rows. So these are the 2 rows with astronaut ID 100 and 200. So this is how you use MySQL client to connect to the database and do operations in it. And right now what I'll do is, I have used command line. I'll use a Python program to do the same. I'll use that Python program to connect to this MySQL database and fetch one of these 2 rows. All right, this is a Python program. It's very simple actually. It is using the PyMySQL library, and from there it is importing the connections method. I'm also importing operating system, pprint, and sys methods, although sys is not being used. Now these are environment variables. So if you see database host, database port, database user, and db password, all these are environment variables. And I'll change the name to db host and db port. The reason you want to pass environment variables, because see, we'll be using these information or these variables to connect to the database or database engine, like we did using MySQL client. We had to mention the host DNS name and the port also. So these are the environment variables which I'm getting uh, from multiple. So these variables are being defined at environment level, like db host, db port, db user, db pwd, or db password. All these variables will be captured in this program using the module OS which I have imported. So this is how you get the environment variable in the Python code itself. The reason you want to use environment variable, because uh, if you have seen that I used MySQL client, and there I had to provide the host DNS name and the port number, and then the user and password, of course. But if you have multiple environments like dev, stage, and production and QA, you'll be creating multiple database instances. But as a best practice, you should not ever change your program. The same program should be passed across from dev to stage to QA and then to prod. So if you parameterize your program, then you can use the same program everywhere. So you know that if the program is working in dev or QA or stage, then it will work in production also, because it is essentially the same code. You're only changing the parameters. If something goes wrong, you know that something is wrong with the parameters, but not with the code. So it reduces your debugging effort and troubleshooting effort by a huge margin. Now it falls in the category of something called 12 factor app. That's a application best practice. You should always do this. You should always parameterize your program. Now, as I said, it is getting these values from the operating system, all these environment variables. Now these are the variables which I'll be defining, and then it is taking a raw input. Basically you have to provide this input in the screen, and then it is making a connection to the same host, port, and everything. So basically using this is where the connection is being made. In the command prompt, I had typed MySQL, then dash dash host, then the DNS name, dash dash port, then the port number, dash U and for the user, and dash P for the password. It is actually doing the same thing in this program. It is connecting to that database instance. And then I'm using a select SQL. So this is the SQL. If you see, it is selecting everything: astronaut ID, first name, last name, primary interest, location, and it is selecting from astronaut table which we had just created, but we are passing the astronaut ID, and this astronaut ID is being taken from here. And how to execute? You create a cursor for by MySQL and then execute it, and then finally you close the cursor. If something goes wrong, then of course we'll get an error. We'll see if something is wrong or not. One more important thing, this program will be used for our 3-tier application also. I'm using this program currently from my personal laptop. I could run this program from an EC2 instance also, and you can run this from your laptop also, as long as you create the proper table. That means these columns should be there, the table name should be same, so on and so forth. But in future, I will make modifications to this code only so that it runs using Lambda. Now let us try to run this program. Before that, I'll have to set up this variables. Now in Python, it is done using some settings, but in Java and Node.js it would be different. In PyCharm, the way you set the settings is here. In the preference, you have to go to build, execution, and deployment. Then you have to go to console, and then Python console. There's it says about environment variable. There's no environment variable as of now. I'll click here and then add. The first one is db host, whose value should be, it should be the endpoint of the MySQL DB instance in AWS RDS. We already know that this is the endpoint. I'll copy this and paste it there. Then the next variable is db port, which is nothing but 3306, and then db user, which is root, and then db password, which is abcd1234. Click OK, apply, and then OK. So these environment variables have been applied. So these are the variables. And now if I run this code, it should run. Let us go ahead and see that. So it is asking for astronaut ID. You have to mention either 100 or 200. So it is saying it cannot connect MySQL server on localhost. So it is trying to connect to localhost, but that should not be the case.